So it's been a while, but it's time to return to the mini-series I've been doing on the American open wheel split. Basically, a civil war between two open wheel series in the United States, starting around the mid-90s or so. On one side, you've got CART, Championship Auto Racing Teams, which was the premier racing series in North America up until the mid-90s, and on the other side, you've got the Indy Racing League, which was a breakaway league designed to return American open wheel racing to its traditional roots. And over the last couple of episodes, we've looked at the hows and the whys of it all getting started, and what that did for each of the two series after the split started in 1996. And the first battle was in the May of that year, when the IRL hosted the Indy 500 in its traditional May slot. But on the same day, the CART series had the US 500 at Michigan that just caused confusion. Something in the region of, my favourite driver and team is racing at Michigan, but oh man, it's Indy. Indy will always be Indy. But it looked like CART was winning the war, as you had names like Franchitti and Castroneves and Kanaan and Zanardi. Basically, all the big names and all the big sponsors were tied up in CART. So there was money, star power, and commercial appeal. And it looked like that the year 2000 was going to be brilliant for the series because, like I said, you've still got all those big names there. But for the 2000 Indy 500, Chip Ganassi, either of his own volition or through pressure from his title sponsor Target, went to the Indy 500, qualified, and won it. But we'll get to that in a bit because we really need to start in 1999 here. Zanardi had gone back to Formula One to have quite a disappointing season with Williams, and Bobby Rahal had retired. But in that year, there was still the likes of Tony Kanaan, Dario Franchitti, Juan Pablo Montoya, Max Papis, Mark Blundell, Brian Herter, and Helio Castroneves. Teams like Forsyth, Penske, Ganassi, Newman Haas, and so on were all present. So there was still the star power there, even if the Indy 500 showcase event, akin to WrestleMania, not being on the schedule. And as I've said in the other two episodes of this, there are a few parallels between the split and the Monday Night Wars. But while the grid was absolutely stacked, CART was making the headlines on ESPN for all of the wrong reasons. Alonso Jr. broke his leg at Homestead. Christian Fittipaldi also broke his leg. Adrian Fernandez broke his hand, Mark Blundell broke a vertebra in his spine, and Patrick Carpentier was also on the injured list. There's a few drivers on the wiki page for the season who only did a few rounds, but they were only there because they were replacing the injured drivers for the most part. And as Bleacher Report's article on this era of racing pointed out, these were the more popular drivers. Unser was the son of Al Unser. Christian Fittipaldi is the nephew of Emerson Fittipaldi. And Mark Blundell has had a career where, you name it, he's raced it. And he was flying the flag for the UK along with Dario Franchitti. But it was to get worse. At the end of the season, Gonzalo Rodriguez and popular Canadian Greg Moore were both killed. Rodriguez at Laguna Seca's Corkscrew and Moore at Fontana. And then when the season ended, Unser Jr. left the series, losing the series its biggest name. Notice how I said left and not retired, because in the year 2000, Alonso Jr. was on the entry list for the 2000 IRL season, driving for Gallers Racing, or Gals Racing, however it's pronounced, and it meant that he could enter the Indy 500 as well as the rest of the season and potentially add another Indy 500 win to his family's collection, if you want to call it that. But in the year 2000, Chip Ganassi decided to enter the Indy 500, like I said, either because he wanted to or because he was under pressure from Target, but he entered anyway, and Montoya dominated the event. I think he led like 190 of the 200 laps or something ridiculous like that. So what then happened is that opened the floodgates. It's like how towards the end of the Monday Night Wars, the likes of Chris Jericho, The Big Show, Eddie Guerrero, the Dudley Boys, and he who shall not be named started appearing on the World Wrestling Federation's programming. WCW fans then started defecting to the other side to watch the WWF's programming, but, at least CART didn't shoot itself in the foot by revealing who'd won the IRL race because the IRL had taped its races a few days in advance. Oh, Mankind's just beaten The Rock for the WWF Championship. Click. It's 2001 where it all started going wrong for CART. One of those things was caused by ineptitude and arrogance. One was a freak accident, and the other was, well, it actually had nothing to do with CART. CART was branding itself as the fastest thing on four wheels. And it was. At least on ovals, that is. Speeds in the region of 240 miles an hour at the fastest ovals, and 250 miles an hour was probably so much as a target rather than a these are getting a tad fast, lads. And as the series went to Texas for the Firestone Firehawk 600, there were concerns that a driver might not make it back from the event. And it has to be said that this event was supposed to be held on the 29th of April 2001. CART had scheduled a test back in the December of 2000 to make sure that the cars could run safely. Kenny the G-Man Brack did a test and ran 100 laps where his average speed was something in the region of 220 miles an hour, which was deemed to be safe by CART and the rest of the teams. But Eddie Gossage, yes, does rhyme with sausage, the owner of TMS, asked for CART to do some more modifications to the cars to slow them down just that little bit more, just to keep the media quiet. So CART basically just turned down the manifold pressures on the engines and then fitted a Hansford device to the rear wing, which I'm assuming just produces more drag and slows things down. I don't know, I've got an audio engineering degree. But then in the February of 2001, Jimmy Vasser did that same test and clocked a 215 mile an hour average, but the day after that, Franchitti went out and did 225. Then Penske sent out Castroneves and he did 226, and given that the NASCAR cars at the time were running about 190-192 mile an hour averages, CART could slow the cars down by about 15 miles an hour and still claim to be the fastest. But then it got ridiculous when Tony Kanaan went out when the official session started and clocked 233. Then that evening, Dr. Stephen Olvey said he'd been approached by two drivers stating that they'd been suffering from dizziness and disorientation while on the track. The next day, speeds hit an absolutely ridiculous 236 miles an hour. As a result of these speeds and the steep banking found at TMS, the drivers were experiencing 5.5 G in the corners, which added up over the four corners equated to about 18 of the 23 seconds that they were actually doing across the lap, and then doing that again and again and again and again. Also that weekend, Mauricio Gugelmin crashed heavily with one of the impacts registering 113 G, and Cristiano De Mata also had a massive crash. In Gugelman's case, he'd already crashed once, something in the region of about 60 G, and then ended up about another half a mile down the straight where he hit another wall, and that was the one that registered at 113 G, but miraculously survived. He was a bit dazed, he was slightly knocked out, slightly not with it, but he survived. After qualifying, Carpentier claimed that he couldn't walk in a straight line after getting out of his car, and it was something like 5 to 10 minutes after getting out of his car that he was able to walk properly again. So Stephen Olvey called all the drivers together and they had a meeting. After the meeting, he called a friend and he asked this friend, who worked at the University of Texas, what will happen if the human body sustained more than 5G for an extended amount of time. His friend responded that the drivers had approximately 7 minutes of driving time before they started experiencing serious issues, and Olvey told this friend that 21 of the 25 drivers had been experiencing the following: disorientation, inner ear issues, vision problems, lack of peripheral vision, and reaction times increased by a second after just 10 laps. 10 laps at that track at those speeds equates to about 3 minutes and 50 seconds, so by lap 17, 18, 19 at the maximum, the drivers would start blacking out, crashing, and potentially dying. So Dr. Olvey's friend at the University of Texas said slow the cars down to about 225 miles an hour to ensure that nobody dies. So they tried to turn the engine power down. The car's not running properly. They tried to take away some downforce. The car's too unstable. Then they suggested running the road course, and TMS said, yes, we will make it possible for you to run the road course, but they've brought oval spec cars. TMS then sued CART for breach of contract, so CART had to cover basically everything. They had to cover the sanctioning fees, they had to cover the promotional costs, and they had to cover the cost of refunding every single ticket. Totted up, it was something in the region of about $7 million. As drivers had run tests in that 225 mile an hour window, CART had basically assumed, hey, it'll be fine. But it wasn't until the likes of Kanaan and Brack started hitting 233, 236 that it was too late to do anything about it.
So then, fast forward to September, and CART is racing at the Lausitz ring in Germany, and that race was held on the 15th of September 2001, just 4 days after the events in New York, Washington and Pennsylvania. And CART was already under criticism for racing so soon after the events of 9/11, given that the NFL, MLB and NASCAR had all cancelled their events, but the Italian Grand Prix and Formula 1 still went ahead as planned. To try and take some of the heat off, they renamed the event the American Memorial, but I'm assuming that CART really went ahead with the event because of, logistics. They were probably halfway getting the stuff over to Germany, or that it was already over in Germany, and because of restrictions with the US airspace at the time because of the events of 9/11, it was probably easier to just go ahead with it, move up to the UK afterwards to race at Rockingham, and then get back to America once the airspace was reopened. Then, to make things just a little bit more ridiculous, qualifying was a washout, so the grid was set based on championship standings. And the race had a couple of cautions for racing incidents, but on lap 143, disaster. Zanardi had come in for his pit stop, and as he approached the pit exit, he put the power down and lost control of the rear. The car then spun upwards over the grass and onto the track. Carpentier managed to avoid Zanardi, but Alex Tagliani ploughed into the Italian at around 200 miles an hour. And if you've seen the crash, and it is on YouTube if you do want to watch it, but viewer discretion is advised on all that because it is pretty grim, you'll notice there's bits of red flying off the car because Zanardi's car was red. But what if I told you that not all of that was carbon fibre? Yeah, some of that is Zanardi's blood because his legs were amputated at the point of impact. Zanardi lost 75% of the blood in his body, but somehow he survived. The guy's a unit, absolute unit. But while the cancellation of 2 races in Texas and Rio, along with the Zanardi crash, did little to help CART's image, the switch in sides was fully on. Toyota announced it was going to move to the IRL starting in 2003, and Honda also decided to go with them. Penske, the biggest team in CART, switched to the IRL full-time, as did Ganassi, although Ganassi ran in both series, and by 2003, the big boys had all switched to what was now called IndyCar, and CART was filing for bankruptcy. But some of the CART teams banded together and bought the series, renaming it Champ Car, while the IRL was now allowed to use the IndyCar moniker full-time. After 7 years of war, it looked like Tony George was the winner after all. But was he? So then, that's the end of part 3 of a mini-series covering the American open wheel racing split. If you've learned something new here today, be sure to give the video a thumb up. And if you're not already subscribed, do get subscribed and get that bell on as well, so you never miss out on a future video. Massive thanks as ever to the fine folk at Patreon, and if you wish to support the channel at a more personal level to help buy up photos for use as thumbnails and things like that for pressing issues when the Formula 1 season starts again, you can help by following the link in the description, where there'll also be links to Discord and also to my socials. So until next time, I've been Aidan Millward. Have a great day wherever you live in the world, and I'll see you all again soon for another video. Goodbye.